Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to another tutorial where I'm going to teach you how to use PGAdmin with a Dockerized Django project. So in this tutorial, we're going to be connecting PGAdmin to Postgres. We're going to set up port forwarding, or I'm going to show you how you would set up port forwarding in the Docker Compose file, and we're going to register a new server in PGAdmin. We're also going to use PGAdmin to make basic queries to our application. In order to take this tutorial, you're going to need the starting code, which I'll provide the link to in the description of the video. You're also going to need to have Docker and Docker Compose installed. The best way to do that is to install Docker Desktop and have that installed and working on your machine. You're also going to need to have PGAdmin downloaded and installed on your machine as well, which I will also link to in the description of the video. PGAdmin is available for all different operating systems, Linux, Mac, and Windows, so you should be able to download it and have it installed on your machine. Also, please support our channel by liking and subscribing if you found this video useful. You can also use the comments below to ask questions or to suggest future ideas for content that we create. Please also visit our website, londonappdeveloper.com, for courses and more tutorials. Okay, so let's get started. First thing that you're going to need to do is download PGAdmin. So as I mentioned, there's a link to it in the description of the video. Basically, if you just search for PGAdmin, it is the first result, and you can go ahead and download and install this for whichever operating system you are using. So I obviously already have it downloaded and installed, so just make sure that you download it and open it up yourself on your local machine, and then we can continue. We're going to start by cloning the starting code. So this is a project that we've already created, and it has a basic Django application dockerized with a Postgres database. There's also a React front end to it as well. However, we won't be using that for the purposes of this tutorial. So I'm going to start by cloning this repository, which you can get from the description of the video as well. So I'm going to copy the clone URL, and then I'm just going to open up my terminal here, and I'm going to do git clone, and I'm just going to call this project PGAdmin. Then I'm going to open up the PGAdmin project in my code editor, Visual Studio Code here. So you can see if you click on the Docker Compose file, we have a fully configured and Dockerized project all ready to go. If you're interested in learning how we created all of this, then we have other tutorials in this series, which we will link to in the description of the video, where you can learn how to set up the Django project, the React front end, and connect it up with a Postgres database. Let's just go ahead and test that the project works by opening up the terminal and making sure that we're in the project location and typing docker compose up. This should build and start the project for us on our local machine. Now, it might take a while the first time you run this because it needs to download and build the image, and that can take a few minutes. So we're just going to wait for that to complete, and then we'll continue. Okay, so once the project is running, we can go ahead and open up our browser and just head over to localhost 8000/admin, and that should take you to the Django admin login page. Once we have this page open, we just need to create some credentials that we can use to log in with. So let's go ahead and do that by opening up the terminal, and I'm going to create a new tab, and we're going to run the following Docker command. We're going to type docker compose run --rm backend, and then sh-c python manage.py create super user, and then close the quotes here and hit enter. This will go ahead and allow us to create a new user. So I'm just going to call the user Mark, which is my name, and then I'm going to put the email address mark@example.com, and I'm going to put a password. Oop, passwords didn't match. Type that again. Okay, so now I've created a super user. I can go ahead and log in here. So I'll type Mark and then the password that I provided. And you can see that I have logged in to the application. Okay, so next what we're going to be doing is connecting up PGAdmin. So before we can do that, we need to make sure that the port on our database is forwarded to our local machine. So if you open up the Docker Compose.yaml file in the project and scroll down to DB, you can see here that I've already mapped the ports. This is important for when you want to connect to the database that is running in Docker Compose, because the application would run without having these ports mapped. However, you want to map these ports to your local machine in order to connect to the database from an external application that isn't within our Docker Compose environment. So the way that we do that is we have ports, and then ports 5432, which is the default port that Postgres runs on, is mapped to port 5432 on our local machine. So we've already done this in our Docker Compose file. I'm just showing you this because if you're working on a different project, then there's a good chance that it isn't already mapped to your port on the local machine. So you need to make sure that this ports line here is added. So ports and then 5432 to port 5432. Okay, so if you had to add that to your project and it wasn't already added, then you would need to restart the Docker Compose service after you make the change to Docker Compose.yaml. Once you made sure that the ports are mapped, you can go ahead and open up PGAdmin. So I'm going to open up PGAdmin on my machine. I'm using a Mac, so I just use the Spotlight Finder there. But if you're using a different a Windows or a Linux, or you want to open it in a different way on Mac, then you just go to your applications on the machine and you open up the PGAdmin application. When it first opens up, it looks like this. So you can see we've got the servers block here. I'll just make this full screen. So we've got the servers block here, and basically there's nothing currently added. So the first thing that we need to do is add a server or configure PGAdmin to connect to our server on our Docker Compose configuration. So the way that we do that is we're going to right click servers here, and we're going to go register server, and then we give it a name. And this is really just to identify which server it is in the Explorer here. You can configure multiple different servers. So you might have one for the production database, one for the development database, and one for your local database. So I'm going to call this local-dev-database. And then in the connection tab, we need to specify the host. So because we're running the database on our local machine, the host is just going to be localhost, which is 127.0.0.1. If you are hosting this on a remote server, then you would need to put in the host name for the remote server that you need to connect to here. We're using port 5432, which is the default port that Postgres runs on. So we'll leave that as default. And then we'll leave the maintenance database as Postgres, and then we'll change the username to the details that we configured in Docker Compose. So if we just head back to our Docker Compose file, you can see here on lines 42, 43, and 44, this is where we configure the server. So on line 43, we have Postgres user equals user, which is the username. So we're just using user as the username to connect to the database. And then we have the password local dev PW. Now, of course, this is just what I have configured for this project here. If you have a different project, then you're going to need to provide the credentials that match the login for that particular server. So we can head back now to the PGAdmin interface, and we can put username, user, and then we can put password, local dev PW. Just double check that. So it was local dev PW. There you go. Okay, and now you can optionally save this. Of course, you're only going to do this if you're on a machine that you trust. If you are connecting to a production database or something like that, it might be best not to save the credentials on your local machine, because it means that anybody with access to those credentials will be able to log into the database and have whatever access the user has on that database. So for security purposes, I recommend if you have a production database, then maybe don't save the password and enter it every time you need to connect, just in case somebody gets access to your machine or your machine is compromised. Okay, once that's added, you can click save, and it will go ahead and it will automatically save and connect to the server. So here on the dashboard, you can see that you've got some basic stats about the server. So you can see it's got the transactions per second and the hits and things like that. This is useful if you want to determine the load on the server. You can do quite a lot with PGAdmin. We're just going to be going into the basics in this video. It's quite a powerful tool. It's a professional database administration tool. So there's lots that you can do with PGAdmin. What we're going to do is we're just going to go and learn how to inspect our database. So once you're connected here, you can see that you can expand this option here in the tree, and you can click databases, and then you have the different databases here. If you click on the top one, it will connect to it, and you'll be able to inspect the schemas. So the schemas is where all of the tables and all of the useful stuff for the database is stored. And you can see here, we got tables. So if we expand that, you can see all of these tables that exist in our database. Now, when you're working with Django, usually, in most cases, Django handles all of the interaction with the database itself. So it's not very often that you would need access to the database using a tool like PGAdmin. However, occasionally, if you need to debug issues or you need to export data, it is very useful to have access to PGAdmin and be able to connect to the database directly. However, it's worth mentioning that you should avoid, where possible, making any changes to the structure of the database. So that is adding tables, removing tables, changing the fields on tables, and so on. All of those changes should go through the Django migrations process, which is built into Django and which we have other tutorials which we show you how to use that. So essentially what you would use this for is mostly just querying and inspecting the data. So let's say you wanted to see all of the users in the system. You can see auth user here. You can right click that and go view and edit data and click on all rows. And you can see here that we have the user that I created earlier. So that is the super user that we created. It's got the ID, it's got the password hash, which as per best practices is a hash and not the clear text of the password. If I typed all of this in and remembered how to type it in, then that would be pretty amazing. I wish I had a memory that was good enough to do that. However, this is just the hash of the password that I created. So it's a one-way hashing system, so you wouldn't be able to decipher what the actual password is that I put in. And then you have all the other columns on the table. So you can see that if we go to the Django admin, we'll head over to the browser again, and let's create a new item in the recipes. We'll just call this test, and then test 1, 2, 3. Click on save, and then you head back to PGAdmin and you right click on the core recipe table and click on all rows. You can see that it's added this new value here. If you want to run more complicated queries, which is often what people would use PGAdmin for, then you can type a custom query by right-clicking the table and clicking the query tool. Then in the query, you can create your own SQL, put in any SQL that you want, such as select all from core_recipe, and you can run that and it will run the query, or you can do select sum, or let's say count ID as total recipes. And you can see it returns the total count of recipes. So you can basically put in any SQL query that you want to execute here. You can change and update the data, but as I mentioned, it's best to keep all changes to the data done through the Django code, because you want to make sure that the models are consistent and that you don't make any changes that break the integration with Django. So it's best, if possible, to just use this for things like running reports, extracting data, taking backups, and so on. So that's how you connect PGAdmin to a database that's running inside Docker Compose. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.